I'm going to show you an organisation that has supplied every Labour Prime Minister in history, currently has 141 MPs in Parliament and more than half the Cabinet. And I won't need a single leaked document to prove it, because they'll tell you all of this themselves. It's literally on their website, and they're proud of it. If you've already heard about the Fabian Society, stick around. Most of what's out there on this is surface level, or just conspiracy theory. This video has the receipts, direct quotes with dates and page numbers from the Fabians' own publications. Everything you're about to hear, you can go and verify yourself. The bit they're less keen for you to look at, the eugenics, the lethal chambers, the praise for Stalin, that's in their publications too. You just have to know where to look. And the man who tried to warn you about all of this, his teacher at Eton was one of them. This is the Fabian Society, founded in 1884, named after a Roman general who won wars by refusing to fight them. And they chose, and I want you to appreciate this, they chose a wolf dressed as a sheep for their coat of arms, on purpose. That's their actual logo. Most organisations at least try to hide the game. These lot put it on their headed notepaper. 4th of January 1884, 9 people in a room above a shop on Osnaburg Street, North London. Among them, a children's author, a stockbroker, and a civil servant. They just split from a group called the Fellowship of the New Life, which was basically a philosophy club for people who wanted to improve themselves morally before changing the world. The Fabians had a different idea. Forget self-improvement, they wanted power. Within 16 years, they helped found the Labour Representation Committee, which became the Labour Party. The Fabians, the trade unions, the Independent Labour Party. Of those original founding organisations, only the Fabian Society is still affiliated to Labour today, in unchanged form, 126 years later. Still there. Now, the name tells you everything. They named themselves after Quintus Fabius Maximus, a Roman general who beat Hannibal not by fighting him, but by exhausting him. Harassment and attrition, rather than pitched battle. Their motto, which Frank Podmore almost certainly wrote himself rather than quoting any actual Roman, "For the right moment you must wait, but when the time comes, you must strike hard." They had 3 logos over the years, each one is a gift. First, the tortoise, with the slogan, "When I strike hard." Slow and patient, but violent when it counts. Second, the wolf in sheep's clothing, which they use as a full heraldic coat of arms, until even they realised the optics were dreadful and quietly dropped it around the turn of the 20th century. And third, the one they use today, a plain red square. Clean, modern, says absolutely nothing. 3 logos, threatening, honest, and then bland. You can read the entire history of their public relations strategy in that sequence. They published Fabian Essays in Socialism in 1889. Shaw edited it. First print run, 1,000 copies. Sold out instantly. Within 2 years, 27,000 copies. Before the First World War, 46,000. Translated into German, Dutch, Norwegian. The argument was simple. Socialism wasn't revolution, it was evolution. The natural next step. Inevitable. Gradual. Sidney Webb even coined the phrase, the inevitability of gradualness. There's a stained glass window involved in this story, by the way, and when I tell you who unveiled it, and what's depicted on it, you'll understand why that matters. But we'll come back to that. Quick aside, that'll become important later. Around 1917, a young teacher called Aldous Huxley taught French at Eton for about a year. Nearly blind, couldn't keep order in a classroom. Students played cards at the back. But he was brilliant with language. One of his pupils was a boy called Eric Blair. You know him as George Orwell. Huxley's brother, Julian, would go on to become the first director of UNESCO, the president of the British Eugenics Society, and the man who coined the word transhumanism in 1957. Aldous would write Brave New World, drawing directly on the eugenic ideas circulating in these exact circles. Remember those names, we're coming back to them. Right, so you've got 9 people in a room in 1884. Within 20 years, they'd founded the London School of Economics, started a major political magazine, and written the Labour Party's constitution. How? They called it Permeation. That's their word, not mine. The idea was simple. Don't build your own institutions, get inside existing ones. George Bernard Shaw, Fabian member from 1884, Nobel Prize winner, co-founder of the LSE, wrote this in 1892. We permeated the party organisations and pulled all the wires we could lay our hands on with our utmost adroitness and energy. That's a direct quote from their own published tract. He's boasting about it. In 1908, Shaw went further. He wrote that the Fabians had set themselves two tasks. First, to provide a parliamentary programme for a prime minister converted to socialism. And second, to make it as easy and matter of course for the ordinary respectable Englishman to be a socialist as to be a liberal or conservative. Normalise it. Make it the default. Make it so ordinary that questioning it seems eccentric. That was the explicit plan, written down, published, and distributed. And their historian, Margaret Cole, explained the system even more clearly. She said permeation meant converting key persons who were in a position to take action. And then, this is the bit that matters, she added, it was not necessary that these key persons should be members of the Fabian Society. Often it was, as well, they should not. So, the people doing the work don't need to be members. They just need to have been influenced by members. That's how you run a network with 6,500 people and end up with half the UK government cabinet. So, what did they permeate? Well, they didn't just infiltrate existing organisations. They built new ones to do the permeating for them. 1895, they founded the London School of Economics. Sidney Webb's stated intention, to teach political economy on more modern and more socialist lines. That's a direct quote, by the way. The school that trained generations of civil servants, economists, and world leaders, founded by Fabians, explicitly to push economics leftward, and located a short walk from Whitehall. 1913, they founded the New Statesman, and it worked. Margaret Haig Thomas observed that the magazine was being taken in by an enormous number of civil servants, and was penetrating right through Whitehall. And the reach went well beyond Britain. Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, was, in his own words, vaguely attracted to the Fabians and socialistic ideas during his years in London. His mentor, Annie Besant, was a prominent early Fabian. India's post-independence economic policy, state-owned heavy industries, regulated private enterprise, the licence Raj, was built on Fabian lines. Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, studied at the LSE. He later rejected it entirely. His words, like Nehru, I had been influenced by the ideas of the British Fabian Society, but I soon realised that before distributing the pie, I had first to bake it. Even Muhammad Ali Jinnah, founder of Pakistan, was described as an avid member of the Fabian Society in the early 1930s, though the evidence suggests he joined instrumentally to gain credibility for a Labour parliamentary candidacy. One small society in London, influencing the governance of India, Singapore, Pakistan. And that's before we get to the part where they wrote the Labour Party's constitution. And then Sidney Webb wrote Clause 4 of Labour's constitution in 1918, the clause that committed the party to common ownership of the means of production, the words that defined Labour for 77 years, until Tony Blair replaced them, using, naturally, a Fabian pamphlet as his justification. But here's what makes this more than historical trivia. You can trace the pipeline from Fabian pamphlet to actual law, specific examples documented. 1992, a Financial Times journalist called Ed Balls writes a Fabian pamphlet arguing the Bank of England should be operationally independent. Gordon Brown reads it, recruits Balls as his advisor. 6th of May 1997, 5 days into the new Labour government, Brown announces Bank of England independence. pamphlet to law in 5 years. The BBC's Robert Peston called it an essential tract. 2022, Unison commissions the Fabian Society to develop a roadmap for a national care service. June 2023, report published. 81 pages, 48 recommendations, designed for Shadow Minister Wes Streeting. June 2024, National Care Service appears in Labour's manifesto. July 2024, Labour wins, pamphlet to policy in 2 years. And the longest pipeline of all, Beatrice Webb's 1909 Minority Report to the Royal Commission on the Poor Laws, the blueprint for the welfare state, finally became the Beveridge Report in 1942 and the NHS in 1948, 39 years from pamphlet to legislation. Now, most think tanks write papers that gather dust on shelves. The Fabians write papers that become law. Now you might think, fewer members than a Premier League stadium holds. How does an organisation that size end up running the country? Let me give you the maths. Labour has roughly 400,000 members. Maybe a bit less now. The Fabian Society has about 6,500. That's 1.6% of Labour's membership. Supplying 141 of 411 Labour MPs. That's 34%. A third of the parliamentary party. From 1.6 of the membership. More than half the cabinet. Keir Starmer, former executive committee member. Rachel Reeves, former executive committee member. Wes Streeting, executive committee member who stepped down after the election. David Lammy, Angela Rayner, Yvette Cooper, Ed Miliband, Pat McFadden, Bridget Phillipson, Shabana Mahmood. I could keep on going. Starmer was the first person in history to win the Labour leadership while sitting on the Fabian Society's executive committee. He wrote his political vision document, called The Road Ahead, as a Fabian pamphlet. Downloads crashed their website. David Lammy stood at the Fabian conference in January 2024 and thanked them publicly. The support you have given today's Fabians, Keir Starmer, myself, and much of the shadow cabinet. And in January 2025, they appointed a new General Secretary, Joe Dromey, son of Harriet Harman, Labour MP for 42 years and Deputy Leader, son of Jack Dromey, Labour MP who died in office. Labourlist called him one of Labour's Red Princes. Multi-generational, you might say. Annual income, £811,000, 16 staff. Your local Tesco Express has more employees and less influence over the direction of the country. And if you want to see what happens when someone tries to take Labour in a direction the Fabians don't approve of, just look at Jeremy Corbyn. In 2016, 24 frontbenchers resigned from his shadow cabinet in a coordinated effort to force him out. The Fabian wing of Labour was openly at war with the Corbyn left. Andrew Harrop, then the Fabian General Secretary, published a paper arguing Labour under Corbyn had no roadmap for winning back lost voters. Starmer himself resigned from the shadow cabinet that year. Within 4 years, he was leader, the first Fabian executive member to hold the position. In autumn 2023, Harrop published Plans for Power, a document compiling the Society's policy ideas, from early years to pensions, planning reform to industrial strategy. After the election, the Fabian Society stated, again, their own words, Labour's manifesto was shaped by Fabian values and filled with Fabian values. Shaped by Fabian values, filled with Fabian values. Their words, not mine. Right, so that's who they are and how they operate. But what the founders actually believed, what they wrote down in their own publications, under their own names, that's where this stops being interesting and starts being something else entirely. The people who designed Britain's welfare state, the system built to protect the most vulnerable, simultaneously and openly advocated eugenics, forced sterilisation, lethal chambers, the elimination of people they considered unfit. These are direct quotes, published under their real names, in mainstream outlets. George Bernard Shaw, 1903, in the appendix to his play Man and Superhuman, he wrote, "The only fundamental and possible socialism is the socialism of the selective breeding of man." That's the co-founder of the LSE and the New Statesman, the designer of the Fabian window, and he was just getting started. 1910, Shaw lectures at the Eugenics Society, reported in the Daily Express, 4th of March. A part of eugenic politics would finally land us in an extensive use of lethal chamber. A great many people would have to be put out of existence simply because it wastes other people's time to look after them. 1931, a filmed interview for Paramount British Pictures. Shaw, looking directly at the camera, said,
"I don't want to punish anybody, but there are an extraordinary number of people whom I want to kill. Not in any unkind or personal spirit, but it must be evident to all of you. You must all know half a dozen people at least, who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. And I think it would be a good thing to make everybody come before a properly appointed board and say every 5 years or every 7 years, just put him there and say, 'Sir' or 'Madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence?' If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social boat, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us and it can't be of very much use."
1938, Shaw wrote to Beatrice Webb. This is 5 years after Hitler came to power. "I think we ought to tackle the Jewish question by admitting the right of the state to make eugenic experiments by weeding out any strains they think undesirable." 1938, the Jewish question. Weeding out. 5 years into the Third Reich. Very interesting. And in 1948, after the liberations of the camps, after the photographs, after the trials at Nuremberg, Shaw wrote in the Atlantic Monthly, "The ungovernables, the ferocious, the conscienceless, the idiots, the self-centered myops and morons. What of them? Do not punish them. Kill, 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 kill them." Sidney Webb, the man who wrote Labour's Constitution, the man who co-founded the LSE. In 1907, in a Fabian tract called The Decline in the Birth Rate, he warned about degenerate hordes and the country slowly but surely falling victim to the Irish and the Jews. And in the Eugenics Review, a mainstream academic journal, Webb wrote, "No consistent eugenist can be a laissez-faire individualist unless he throws up the game in despair. He must interfere, interfere, interfere." H.G. Wells, Fabian member from 1903 to 1908, a founding member of the British Eugenics Society. In 1901, in Anticipations, a book he called the keystone of his life's work, Wells wrote, "And for the rest, those swarms of black and brown and dirty white and yellow people who do not come into the needs of efficiency, well, the world is not a charitable institution, and I take it they will have to go." And then there's William Beveridge. Beveridge wrote the Beveridge Report, the blueprint for the welfare state, the NHS, social security, the safety net. His name is on buildings across this country. He was also a member of the Eugenics Society. He sat on its consultative council until the late 1950s. He died in 1963. On the 16th of February, 1943, the House of Commons debated the Beveridge Report, the document that would reshape Britain. On the same day, the same afternoon, Beveridge slipped out of the gallery and went to the Mansion House to deliver the Galton Lecture to the Eugenics Society. The title, Eugenic Aspects of Children's Allowances. He told the eugenicists that his welfare blueprint was, and I'm quoting, eugenic in intent and would prove so in effect. The architect of the welfare state presented his blueprint to the Eugenics Society and reassured them it served their purposes. On the same day, Parliament was debating it. The Children's Allowance Scheme had been developed within the Eugenics Society with twin aims: encouraging the educated professional classes to have more children, while limiting children born to poor households. And just as a footnote, the Eugenics Society itself didn't disappear, it renamed itself several times. It became the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, which in 2006 became dignity in dying. The names change, the institutional thread doesn't. Beveridge had been trained by the Webbs. He worked as a researcher on Beatrice Webb's 1909 Minority Report, the one that became the welfare state blueprint. The Fabians made him director of the LSE in 1919. The pipeline runs from Fabian circles into eugenics and back again. And one man saw all of this from the inside. George Orwell was a democratic socialist. He fought in Spain. He was never a conservative, never a Fabian, and never fooled by any of this. In The Road to Wigan Pier in 1937, he wrote, "The Coles, Webbs, Strachey's, etc., etc., are not exactly proletarian writers." He argued that middle-class socialists, while theoretically pinning for a classless society, cling like glue to their miserable fragments of social prestige. He saw technocratic socialism, socialism planned by experts, for the people, without the people, as a path to exactly what he spent his life warning against. Now, we're not done with Orwell yet. Wait until you hear what the Fabians did to his words. The founders of the organisation that shaped British democratic socialism also praised Stalinist Russia, denied the famine that killed millions, the Holodomor, and removed a question mark. In 1935, Sidney and Beatrice Webb published a book, Soviet Communism, A New Civilization, over 1,000 pages, based largely on materials provided by the Soviet Embassy in London. Note the question mark. That matters. In 1937, the year the Great Terror was at its height, the year Stalin executed an estimated 680,000 people, the Webbs published a second edition. They removed the question mark. Soviet Communism, A New Civilization. No question. They were sure now. In the third edition, 1941, they defended the purges. Their phrase, strenuous efforts had been made to cut out the dead wood. Shaw visited the Soviet Union in 1931. 9 days, met Stalin for 3 hours, called him a Georgian gentleman, said Russia was a land of hope, while the West consisted of countries of despair. On the 2nd of March 1933, Shaw signed a letter to the Manchester Guardian denying the Ukrainian famine. At the same time, a Welsh journalist called Gareth Jones was on the ground in Ukraine, reporting mass starvation. The Holodomor killed an estimated 3.5 to 5 million people. When Shaw died, the photographs on his mantelpiece included Dzerzhinsky, the founder of the Soviet secret police, Lenin, and Stalin. In December 1933, at a Fabian lecture reported by the New York Times, Shaw praised Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin in the same breath. His justification? They're trying to get something done. Orwell saw this clearly too. He wrote, "Huge events like the Ukrainian famine of 1933, involving the deaths of millions of people, have actually escaped the attention of the majority of English Russophiles." So that's who founded this organisation. That's what they believed. That's what they praised. And now, let me show you, using their own words, that they are still there, in Downing Street, right now. The Fabian Society claims on their own website, in their own publications, that every Labour Prime Minister has been a Fabian. So let's check. Ramsay MacDonald joined the Fabians in the 1880s, sat on their executive from 1894, became Britain's first Labour PM in 1924. Clement Attlee, Fabian member, taught at the LSE, won the 1945 landslide. 229 Fabian Society members elected to Parliament that year. Labour's manifesto was written by Fabian Michael Young. Harold Wilson, Fabian member and chairman of the Society. 12 of his 20 cabinet ministers were Fabians. James Callaghan, Fabian member. Every member of his cabinet reportedly belonged to the Society. Tony Blair, Fabian member, published multiple Fabian pamphlets. The Third Way, The Courage of Our Convictions. And we'll come back to what he did with that stained glass window in a moment. Gordon Brown, Fabian member, Bank of England independence, born from a Fabian pamphlet, enacted in his first week. Keir Starmer, former Fabian Executive Committee member, first leader to win while sitting on that committee, wrote his political vision as a Fabian pamphlet. All 7, every single one. That's a conveyor belt, not a convenience. Now, I promised you a stained glass window. Shaw designed it in 1910. It shows Shaw and Webb hammering out the new world on an anvil. Above them, the wolf in sheep's clothing, on a red shield. Below, smaller figures worship a pile of Fabian books. And H.G. Wells, who'd quit the society by now, is depicted thumbing his nose at the whole thing. The window was stolen from a Fabian country house in 1978, disappeared, turned up briefly in Arizona, then surfaced at Sotheby's in July 2006. On the 20th of April 2006, it was unveiled at the London School of Economics, the university the Fabians founded, by Tony Blair, the sitting Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Blair stood in front of a stained glass window featuring a literal wolf in sheep's clothing and said, on the record, a lot of the values that the Fabians and George Bernard Shaw stood for would be very recognisable in today's Labour Party. George Bernard Shaw, the man who advocated lethal chambers, the man who wrote about the Jewish question in 1938, the man who said kill, kill, kill after the Holocaust. Those values. I said I'd come back to George Orwell, so here's what the Fabians did to his words. In 1941, Orwell gave one lecture to the Fabian Society. Just one. It was called Culture and Democracy. He wrote it out as a manuscript and then sent it to them. When the published version appeared, Orwell discovered they had rewritten it, without his permission, without telling him. His letter, July 1942. I see that besides toning down several phrases I have used, you have gone all through my manuscript and altered every phrase which revealed that I was delivering a spoken lecture. It gives a quite false impression of my written style. In 1949, Orwell instructed his literary executors that the lecture was substantially altered and deformed all the way through without my knowledge or consent. He ordered it never be reprinted. The man who wrote about the manipulation of language by institutions had his own language manipulated by this institution. Then he spent the rest of his life writing about exactly that. He wrote 1984, and before anyone asks, no, he probably didn't name it after the Fabian centenary. The manuscript showed that he actually changed the date 3 times. The working title was The Last Man in Europe. There's no evidence for the conspiracy. The real connection is more interesting than this theory. Nor do the Fabians control Orwell's literary estate. That's another one that circulates online and is actually completely false. His estate passed to his wife, Sonia, then to his son, Richard Blair, who controls it today. And also, there's no connection between Tony Blair and these Blairs, okay? You don't need the conspiracy theories. The documented truth is more than damning enough. The Fabian Society is not a conspiracy theory. They publish their reports openly. Their conferences are attended by MPs, journalists, and lobbyists. Their policy papers become government legislation without a single parliamentary term. They're not hiding. They've just been betting for 140 years that you'd be too busy to look. For 140 years, that bet has paid off. Now you know the name. And once you see the pattern, the pamphlets, the pipeline, the same membership smaller than a market town turning up in every cabinet, you can't unsee it. There's more to this story, particularly about what they're doing right now in 2026 and what's coming next, but I'll have to save that for another video. If you think more people should know this name, share this video, because the Fabians' entire strategy depends on you not doing that. Leave a comment. What do you want me to investigate next about the Fabian Society? If you know something I don't, please share it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.